We've got to go back.
Back where?
Back to the 80s. Welcome to the 80s, where the economy was not the greatest. Inflation was high, and unemployment was at an all-time high since the Great Depression. Nearly 50 banks had failed, which was greater than the 43 banks that failed during the Great Depression. This was caused by many of the same reasons when the banks failed back then. Big loans that wouldn't get paid back. This caused the government to make an S&L system to help pay the banks back. If they wouldn't have stepped in, then the number of banks that failed would have been even greater. President Ronald Reagan was elected in 1981 and quickly turned to saying Reaganomics with his involvement in the economy and what he planned to do. Reagan was a Republican that was in favor of many tax cuts. The biggest one was known as the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. These tax cuts helped with inflation as well. Just Say No. Nancy Reagan was the wife of Ronald Reagan and started the Just Say No campaign to help teach young people and others around the country about violence, drugs, and sex. It taught the country about what to avoid and to be smarter with the choices they make on an everyday basis. She became known as one of the most popular first ladies. Nancy Reagan was also involved with women in the politics of our country because she was the first lady, but she was also involved with domestic issues because of the Just Say No campaign. Issues that were big in the 80s time period included homelessness and women's rights. In the 80s, 14% of the population lived below the poverty line. This led to many people becoming homeless. To help with women's rights, Sandra Day O'Connor became the first woman to join the Supreme Court. Thus, it started the movement to women taking roles of power in our country and in the workforce. To go along with the issues that were happening within our country, there were many other issues that dealt with foreign policy. Terrorist attacks became an issue. Attacks included the U.S. Embassy bombing in Beirut, Lebanon in 1983, the car bomber at the Marine Barracks in Beirut in that October. Also, there was a bombing in the U.S. Senate when a time bomb went off, but luckily it didn't injure anybody. To go along with the terrorist attacks, there was a nuclear plant meltdown in Chernobyl, and the Cold War came to an end with a nuclear treaty. In the last year of the 80s, the Berlin Wall came crumbling down in Germany, and finally became a whole again. The technology of the 80s was cool, radical, far out, and at an all-time high. Our culture was starting to mature and escalate in the ways that we live our daily lives today. Rap and pop music began to take the place of rock and roll that everyone was used to. One of the iconic pop singers that emerged from this time was none other than the pop king Michael Jackson. He began to take the stage with his crazy dance moves, and it was easier for the public to catch this movement because of the formation of MTV. Along with the media, classic movies of our time just came out in the 80s, such as E.T., Poltergeist, Indiana Jones, and Back to the Future. These classics that we enjoy today were made by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And now that this 80s trip is over, it's time to go back to the future.